Now, the Public and Commercial Services Union took the unprecedented step of taking part in legal action against the government over its policy to remove asylum seekers to Rwanda. And it's, of course, the job of civil servants to implement the policy, putting them on a collision course with the government. We can talk now to the PCS Union General Secretary, Mark Serwotka, who joins us now from Wales, I believe. Good to see you on the programme. Before we get to the Rwanda case, I just want to talk to you about a story in the Sunday Telegraph today. Grant Shapps giving an interview where he says that agency workers could be brought in to effectively break strikes to cover the jobs of striking workers. That would be changing the law to remove that restriction. What's your reaction?
Well, that would be an outrageous act if the government go down that road. We've already got the most restrictive anti-union legislation in the whole of Western Europe. It's already incredibly difficult for unions and workers to withdraw their labour. There are so many legal loopholes to fly through. And if you think about what Grant Shapps is trying to do with that legislation, it's to make industrial action ineffective. Now, I believe it's a basic human right to be able to withdraw your labour. You only do it as a last resort, and any attempts to bring people in to undermine disputes will not resolve the problems. At the end of the day, a dispute happens because there's disagreement between the employer and the workforce. That disagreement is not going to be resolved if people can be brought in to undermine disputes. It will lead to bitterness, it will lead to division, and it will lead to these problems getting worse. So what Grant Shapps should really be doing is trying to resolve the dispute to ensure that our rail workers, frontline public sector workers, have decent pay and conditions. They're not threatened with a cut in their cost of living standards, and he should try to resolve the dispute, not pour petrol on the flames and make matters worse.
You say that, strikes are the last resort for workers. And I just wonder if, the government might feel that this kind of change of the law is a last resort for itself too. We've heard from the RNT saying that they're going to call an unknown number of strikes that could go on for an unknown number of days or weeks over the summer. It could potentially, haven't ruled out, lead to a situation where the lights go off. Do you worry that the unions might have actually overplayed their hand a little bit here? And that's why we could be seeing this pushback from the government?
No, I think my own view is probably the unions have underplayed their hand now over far too many years. We've seen right across trade unions in the public and private sector, terms and conditions eroded. In the civil service, for example, we've seen 11 consecutive years of real terms pay cuts. And the fact that it's so difficult now to organise lawful industrial action means all the cards are stacked in the favour of the government or unscrupulous employers, as we've recently seen with P&O Ferries, who just summarily dismissed 800 workers and brought people in at deplorably low levels of pay. So the point of industrial action is that it gives workers collectively the chance to stand together to try and get a better deal. And I think that we have a long and proud history of the right to strike, of the right of people to defend themselves as a last resort. And what I would hope that your viewers would understand, Sophie, is when people go on strike, they lose pay. It's the last thing that they want to do. But if a company is insisting on cutting your pay, cutting your pension, cutting your job, for example, and they will not listen to reason, it's the last thing you can do. And of course, if you're going to withdraw your labour, the point of doing that is to have an effect to try to get people back around the negotiating table. So this is a wrong move on top of already incredibly restrictive legislation, and it will make matters worse, not resolve the problems that we want to see resolved.
We spoke to Rachel Reeves a little earlier on the programme. She refused to go as far as Wes Streeting, who'd said that if he was a member of the RMT, he'd be voting for strike action. I spoke to Mick Lynch on the programme a couple of weeks ago, and he said that he effectively thought that the Labour Party weren't showing they're on the side of workers. He asked the question, what's the point of the Labour Party? Do you agree with Mick Lynch? Do you think that their response has been a bit too bland?
Oh, I would certainly like to see a lot stronger support from the Labour Party. And of course, many in the Labour Party have been quite supportive, whether that's John McDonnell or whether that's Lisa Nandy in recent weeks. But what the Labour Party are going to have to do is come up with a position, because the way things are going, we're going to see more industrial action as the year goes on, because people are facing such a catastrophic cut in their living standards, or in my case, representing people who have been told 1 in 5, 91,000 of them face losing their jobs. They're being told they're getting a 2% pay rise when inflation is 9 to 11%, depending what index you use. We saw the General Secretary of Unison the other day say that she was considering balloting Unison's 1.1 million members. So the Labour Party will have to decide whose side they are on. And given it was founded by the trade unions and they are there to speak up for working men and women, I would hope that we would see Keir Starmer and his team fundamentally come out on the side of nurses, doctors, job centre workers, rail workers and education workers. That's what we want, is a political voice in Parliament who stands with the people who are having to take this difficult stand.
Now, of course, the PCS Union took the unusual action last week of trying to stop the government's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. You took court action, which you lost. The judge found in favour of the government to allow that flight to Rwanda to go ahead. Are you going to be appealing the decision, and do you think that, or do you now accept that this flight is going to go ahead on Tuesday?
No, we're appealing the decision. We're in the High Court tomorrow appealing the decision. And as you say, this is an unprecedented step, Sophie, but let me explain why we're doing it. We have to test the legality of these proposals, but also we need a debate about the morality and lack of humanity that the government is demonstrating. When people are fleeing from Iraq or Iran or Syria or Yemen, and they come to this country, they are fleeing death, torture, and persecution. We should welcome people to this country and treat them civilly and assess their cases when they are here. The fact that people are taking to small boat crossings in the Channel shows how desperate they are. And our members, civil servants, 80% of whom we represent in the border force, don't come to work to be asked to turn those boats back mid-channel, which is what Priti Patel demanded that they did 2 months ago. And I remind viewers, we went to court then, we lost 2 injunctions, but we would have won the case, which is why the Home Office withdrew its policy. And let's remember what Priti Patel wanted PCS members to do was to turn dinghies back mid-channel at risk of death. That was stopped by a legal process. And that's why we're taking legal action now. And we hope we win tomorrow in the Court of Appeal to stop the flight. But of course, the legality of these proposals will only be tested out at the full court hearing in July. And we're absolutely confident that in July, in line with what the UNHCR said very graphically in court, we believe these proposals will be found to be unlawful.
Now, I appreciate the sort of strength of feeling that many will feel, and many of our viewers as well, about this policy. I just want to read part of the Civil Service Code. It says, you must not frustrate the implementation of policies once decisions are taken. You must serve the government, whatever its political persuasion, to the best of your ability in a way which maintains political impartiality, no matter what your own political beliefs are. In seeking an injunction to try and stop this flight, you're effectively trying to change and frustrate the implementation of policy. Many would argue that is breaching the code.
Well, many may argue that. Of course, I think the first point I would make is when that Civil Service Code was written, it was based on 2 fundamental premises. Firstly, that anything you were asked to do as a civil servant was lawful. We believe that this is not lawful, and a court has yet to determine that's the case. But secondly, it presupposes that the government of the day itself abides by the rule of law and acts within the rule of law. We know this government has shown demonstrably it has not done that. And what we saw, if we can just for a minute look at the Partygate proposals, is when it came down to it, it's civil servants who were fined, it's civil servants who are now facing disciplinary action, while the Prime Minister seems to get away scot-free. So given the government's disregard for the rule of law and given
to be fair, the courts have found in favour of the government, that last week.
Well, what they've not found these proposals legal. What happened last week was that an injunction was refused. The legality of the proposals will not be determined till July. And Sophie, the question I would respectfully ask is, imagine if you're a civil servant now in the Home Office who goes to work because you want to see a humane immigration system where people are treated fairly and we comply with our international obligations. Imagine if you're told to do something on Tuesday that in July is subsequently found to be illegal. That would be an appalling situation. And if Priti Patel had any respect, not just for the desperate people who come to this country, but for the workers she employs, she would not ask a single one of them to be part of any deportation of any asylum seeker until at least these cases are heard in court for the full legality judgment. It will be in July.
Just finally, quickly, you rejoined the Labour Party in 2016 to support Jeremy Corbyn in transforming the party. Are you still a member under Keir Starmer?
Yes, I am.
OK. Thank you very much indeed. Mark Serwotka there.
Thank you.